It's been 6 months, well, 7 or 8 actually, since I got the Blackmagic Pocket 6K Pro. Would I still recommend it? Hello, my name is Jonathan Palfrey and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe as it massively helps as always. As you can see, I've changed things around a little bit in my office, just trying to create a sort of permanent studio setup. I think I'm getting there pretty close. Now this is a video that I actually started doing ages ago. I shot it and then I left it ages because I got really busy with work. And actually when I looked back at it and I was going to finish editing it and upload it, I didn't really quite feel I said all the things I wanted to say there correctly, and actually I wanted to change a few bits. So here I am recording it one more time. So what has it been like owning the Pocket 6K Pro? Well, I'm going to go through all of the positives and some of the negatives that I've found after using the camera over a long period of time. Now, if you want to look at some of the more other specs of things and what's included with the camera, the battery grip, the viewfinder, all those kind of things, please check out my reviews I've done already of all those parts. Where, you know, what I say in there, I still stick to a lot of the stuff I've said there. I wouldn't say I've suddenly massively changed my mind on any of the features of the camera, but there are certain things I've certainly learnt from using it over this time. So first off, what do I love about the camera? Well, it's just a beast, isn't it? For the price, it is absolutely incredible. And after using it for several months, it is still an incredible camera to use. I've used it on some very long shoots abroad. We did 2 months straight at one point earlier in the year, and then again I did a few weeks where I was exclusively using this camera about a month ago. And I have to say, in both of those shooting scenarios, it was an ideal camera to use. Its compact size makes it perfect for travel. Much easier than sort of bigger cameras like the C200 and certainly things like the FS7 that I've used before. The picture quality is absolutely incredible. Of course, you've got that 6K RAW, which is impossible to beat. And now, finally, they have fixed pretty much all of the issues that I had with the Pocket 4K. I said it already once in the review, but really what makes this camera special is the screen on the back. And the more you use it, the more you enjoy it. You know, having a 5-inch HD screen that's daylight viewable, and I keep saying this, I said it in the review loads of times and I'll keep saying it again now, it's impossible to beat. They obviously fixed the blue tint issue by giving you an adjustable slider now, which is really great actually, and I think all camera screens should have that because they all do vary slightly, and having that feature built into a camera is really useful. Obviously combine that with the fact that you can tilt it as you're using it, just makes it a lot easier to use. Actually, it gives you an opportunity to hold it against your body as well when you're filming, so you kind of can use it as a bit of support for the camera as well as using it for seeing at different angles. Now, the fact that it doesn't flip out to the side, that hasn't really been an issue to me. In fact, I think it's a good thing that it only goes around the back. You know, you're not filming yourself with this camera, and actually it means that all the ports down the side don't get in the way if you plug anything in on that side there. Like the screen, ND filters has been an absolute game changer for this camera over the 4K, and it is certainly worth considering an upgrade for. Having ND filters makes life so much easier, especially when you're shooting in bright locations, inside and out, and you're constantly adjusting. And it's one of those things that you kind of think, is it a big deal? And I have to say, in the scenarios that I'm shooting with this camera, it certainly is. It's something that I think you really want to have when you have your main camera. You really want to have built-in ND filters because it just makes life so much easier not having to remember bringing filters along and worrying about what size the filter thread is on the front of your lens. Finally, of course, is battery life. It has massively improved over the older cameras. It isn't perfect still. You still do eat through a lot of batteries. I actually take 7 with me on these shoots, and actually that gets through the whole day, no problem really, even on heavy usage. On light usage I may only use say 4 or 5 batteries, but you know, you can feel quite confident with those number of batteries. That said, it's still not that great. I mean, compared to all the competition, this thing really does eat up battery very, very quickly. So what about the optional extras? What about the viewfinder and the battery grip you can purchase for this? Is it worth still purchasing? Well, as you can see, just from where I'm holding here right now, this is the setup, obviously with a lens on the front, that I've been using for nearly all my shoots. And you'll notice the battery grip isn't there. Now, it's not to say the battery grip is a bad device, that it's not worth purchasing. I still think I stand by my sort of review where I said in certain scenarios it does make a lot of sense. It does give you a nice little bit of bulk to the bottom of the camera and a bit of weight, which can be very useful for stability. However, what I found is that I like to switch back and forth between using the gimbal and using this on a tripod or handheld, and it just got in the way. That's where it's a bit frustrating, you know, switching between the two, because it's far too big to use actually on a RS2 gimbal. So personally, I actually prefer just to leave it off so I can quickly grab the camera. It also means it fits in the bag much easier without having to rearrange the different parts. I would say with the battery grip, if you are doing long form interviews, then it could still be useful. You know, there is always that risk with the small batteries in this that you would feel that perhaps if you're doing anything more than 20 minutes of filming, you would perhaps get a little bit nervous about how quickly the battery life is going down on the screen. You'll be fine for 45, 50 minutes, but it's still a bit unnerving, especially if you've already shot a bit that day and you're maybe at, you know, half battery life. You'll think, well, do I need to put a new battery in for this interview? And perhaps you end up starting to waste batteries and just a bit more fiddly than using a camera that has really great battery life. So having that grip just gives you a little bit more confidence in those scenarios. Now, I do like using a viewfinder, and as I mentioned in the viewfinder review, you know, it must be an age thing. If you're over 30 for some reason, you use viewfinders. If you're under, you don't. And I do like that, and I think if it wasn't there, I would miss it. That said, the image quality isn't incredible. It is a little bit frustrating, and it's not up to the spec and standards that we're seeing in a lot of the mirrorless cameras nowadays. And certainly if you use even a camera like an EOS R, it looks so much better than what you're seeing through this viewfinder. And I think for the price, it probably should have been a bit better. I probably still would have purchased it even now after using it for 6 months. I think I still would have gone ahead and bought this with the camera. That said, I think for a lot of people, if you're already not a big user of viewfinders, maybe it's worth skipping, because maybe you really won't appreciate using it at all, with the quality not being quite up to the level that you see elsewhere. So what about the negatives? You've heard a lot about the positives of this camera, a lot of the same points that I made when I did my reviews. But what about the negatives that I've discovered over using it in real world shoots over the last few months? First negative, we'll go back to those ND filters. Although they are wonderful to use, there is one flaw with them, and that's the color shift that they have. It's fine on like the first stage, and on the second stage, it's not too bad. But the third stage actually stacks the two ND filters up to give you a stronger ND. And the problem with that, it does cause quite a color shift. It goes quite bluish magenta, and it's quite frustrating that the one advantage you want of having built-in NDs is to kind of have that consistency going between the stages and not having to worry about, you know, shifts of color when using an external ND filter. But it is frustrating that it does shift, because it does mean that in certain scenarios, if you're using, say, ND4, but then you go up to ND6, you'll notice quite a difference when you look back at the footage. It can actually be quite difficult to get it back looking the same. It seems to affect all areas of the image quite badly, and that can be quite frustrating when trying to match the colors between scenes. Another negative I have to put against this camera's NDs is the fact they can stop working. So on the shoot, I was in Maldives, and it was a very hot day. We've been using the camera a lot, and the camera's handled the heat brilliantly. It has no issues about overheating, that's for sure. However, the ND filters actually got stuck. I could go up, but I couldn't go down. So I could go between, I think, 4 and 6, but I couldn't go down to 2 or clear, even though on the screen it said I was actually switching between the different levels. This was a really strange sort of situation. I had a look online, and some people have had the same problem. I oddly fixed it by actually tapping on the side of the camera. That's apparently was the recommendation. Apparently they can get a little bit stuck sometimes. Maybe it was the heat that was causing it, you know, causing some of the things to misalign or whatever, expand. But it really doesn't inspire that much confidence. And that is one concern I may have with using this as a main camera in the future. I think certainly with any cameras nowadays, because they are much cheaper than they used to be, it is worth having your main camera and a backup camera. Ideally you want two of the same, or at least, you know, two of good quality. And I think that would be the one thing I would say, if you're using this, this might be able to break in some areas easier than some of the more traditional brands out there. So despite the scare with the NDs, it has continued to work absolutely fine since. If I have the issue again, I certainly will let you guys know, and I will raise it up with ProAV where I purchased this from and see if maybe it's an issue that needs to be fixed. So the next negative I just want to talk about was the noise in the image. Now this could be a Gen 4 versus Gen 5 thing. Maybe it's that extra dynamic range that Gen 5 is providing. Maybe it's lifting the shadows a bit more. Maybe that's why it seems worse than the Pocket 4K. But I have to say, I think there is definitely a difference there between the cameras. That I think the 4K looks cleaner, which is surprising really, because you're thinking you're taking a bigger sensor here and you're downsampling 6K maybe to a HD timeline. So you think it would just generally look a bit cleaner than what you see on a 4K. However, I have to say this image has looked quite noisy. I've seen a lot of noise in the shadows if I've tried to lift them and if shooting on ISOs above 400 really. It could be that it's just that because you're using RAW and because there is so much impressive dynamic range in this camera, I mean it is incredible how much there is there, it's certainly more than what's in the 4K. It may be that, with RAW and everything, you're just lifting those shadows a bit more than you would have done with the Pocket 4Ks. You feel like you've got the dynamic range and you can stretch it and use it in the shadows, where in reality you perhaps shouldn't be. And when you're using false color and you've got the inside and the outside of the room all correctly exposed, maybe you think everything is concluded inside the dynamic range, but in reality actually the shadows, you shouldn't be lifting that much. You should be keeping them down in the dark areas so that you don't see that noise. When you do shoot in good light and you shoot at 400 ISO and you don't tweak the shadows too much, I have to say it's brilliant. It looks super clean and super nice. So I think maybe it's more of my kind of user error than actually the camera itself. My next negative is stabilization. This camera has no built-in stabilization. As you can see, it's a very small camera. What makes it most enjoyable to use is using it as a small camera. Yes, you could rig it up, and I think rigging up would certainly solve that problem. It's all about weight really in terms of getting good stable footage. That said, I don't want to do that with this camera. What makes this camera so fun to use is using it in this sort of really compact size. Stick a lens on the front and just start shooting. And as soon as you start adding bulk to it, then a lot of the positives get taken away and it starts becoming quite cumbersome to use. Unfortunately though, if you don't use a stabilized lens or any form of weight to stabilize, this camera does look very shaky. You get a lot of micro jitter, especially anything beyond 35, 50mm lenses. So I would say be cautious what you use this with. If you're going to use a 50mm prime, you really need to think about how you're going to stabilize that lens, whether it's going to be on a tripod or perhaps, shooting higher frame rates and things like that. Shooting at higher frame rates for that matter does help, but there is still a bit of shake there. Shooting at normal frame rates is very shaky, and I really wouldn't recommend doing handheld at normal frame rates without a stabilized lens. It's unfortunate really, because it's something that I think Blackmagic could really simply fix, a bit like what Sony have done with their gyro data and implementing that into their Catalyst software. The whole point of Blackmagic is the pipeline, going from camera all the way through to DaVinci Resolve and the editing. And of course they've got their stabilizer in there, which works really well. But if it could actually read the metadata from the camera and see what the gyro is doing in the camera, which I'm sure it's being recorded into the files, if it could take that and actually apply it to the stabilization, that probably would solve a lot of those problems. My final negative might seem like an odd one to pick, but it's actually the file sizes. And it's the biggest problem that I actually have with this camera. I've mentioned all those other issues, and they're things that you can overcome by using various options, different lenses, by going down different routes of how you shoot. But the file size is something you just really can't avoid. Yes, you can shoot 4K, but it will be cropped, so then you're getting a smaller sensor size effectively, and you don't really want that. And 6K for me, it's just too big. I don't need 6K footage. It's more than overkill. And I think it's more than overkill for pretty much anyone who's actually shooting with a camera in this budget range. It just means far bigger file sizes. It means longer waits for copying. Now, I've upgraded a lot of my devices to make copying as quickly as possible. I'm shooting on CFast cards and transferring them onto SSDs while on shoots. So it's kind of the max speeds I can really get away with this camera for copying, but it still takes some time, and it does eat up a huge amount of data if you're using this for, say, a corporate setting. And that's kind of the big thing that kind of makes me avoid using this camera for any corporate work, is those file sizes. I don't want a terabyte of footage from every single shoot that I do. You know, it doesn't need to be that big. At the end of the day, the client's not really seeing the difference in the quality once it gets uploaded onto the internet. So for me, I just wish it had a way of recording a smaller file format. You know, it's great to have the option there to have super high quality, super huge files that are easy to edit. But sometimes you just don't need that. In a professional environment where you're doing this for work, time is money. And you know, spending time copying, backing up, which you definitely should be doing, it's not great. And what I'd love to do is be able to back everything up onto the internet. I'm certainly not going to be able to do that if each project is coming in at such large sizes. Is there an answer to this? Well, we've seen it in the new Ursa G2 broadcast camera. They've actually added H.264 and H.265 10-bit recording as one of the options, and that's brilliant. That's what I want to see in this camera. Now, this probably doesn't have the processing power inside to be able to deal with that. But if maybe in a future pocket camera or cube camera, which hopefully will one day come out, that is definitely one thing that I think should be added, especially now we know that Blackmagic can do it. So after all that, would I still recommend the Pocket 6K Pro? Well, it is still an incredible camera. You know, there's still nothing in its price bracket that can beat it. It has such incredible features, such as the screen and the raw codec, that it really is hard to beat in this sort of category of camera. That said, there are other options out there that are more functional, that are better for certain types of shoots. So I think it really comes down to what you're planning to shoot and what kind of budget you have to spend on the camera and the rest of the kit you need to go with it. I'd say if, say, you're shooting short films and things, and that's really all you're interested in, you're not interested in doing big corporate productions and things that you've got to do very fast turnaround, then go for it. You'll have an amazing time with this camera without wasting huge amounts of budget on bigger setups like the Ursas, for example. I think this would be a really good option for that. That said, I think if you're focusing on things like weddings and stuff like that, go for things like the A7S. I think as great as this camera is and as great as RAW would be in those situations, those file sizes are really going to be a killer. And not having stabilized sensor, not having things like autofocus, they're just disappointments that I wish Blackmagic will fix. I hope you found this video useful. If you have, please like and subscribe as it massively helps me out. Thank you very much again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.